All right. Hello, everyone. Thanks for coming. This is the November 2nd community call, WNFS community call. Brooke is not here today. Usually Brooke would be running these meetings, but she's busy having meetings in Lisbon. And so that's why I'll do it today. So I'm Philip. I also work at Fission. I work together with Stephen, you can see here, Stephen Akinyemi, on WNFS. And yeah, that's so much for us. On the agenda today, there's basically not much, but two things. One is we've been asked to give a rough roadmap of like what is happening and will happen in WNFS. And also Ishan wants to, or I've asked Ishan to present a little bit and talk a little bit about what they're building on top of WNFS. So yeah, I think if you don't mind, sorry, do I pronounce it correctly, by the way? Is it Isan or Ishan?
Ehsan.
Ehsan, okay. So Ehsan, please go ahead if you want to and talk a little bit about Functionland.
Oh yeah, definitely. Pleasure meeting all of you. So I'm Ehsan actually. My background is in electrical engineering, but I got into web development for when it was like hot for websites. It was 2007 and everyone wanted the website. So I jumped into the web development and have been like a full stack developer since then. So with Functionland, like what we envisioned was to create this decentralized alternative to the cloud ecosystem. And we the protocols that we use are being built on top of libp2p and IPLD basically, and IPFS in the background. So what we do is we still kept the client server model, but now the servers are these small nodes that you see behind me that are like basically put at the user's home, and they create a mesh together, and then the user use their phone. We have we designed a couple of apps ourselves internally. Like one is Photos, an alternative to Google Photos. One is Drive, an alternative to Google Drive. So user can go to Google Play, download them, and now when they upload something, the file is basically being kept at their device, and also like the neighbor's device based on the replication factor that they choose. So I can put up a file with a replication factor of 3, then like my files get replicated 3 times in a network. And we also have this concept of nearby pools, which means people who are nearby, they join a pool together so that we can increase the fetching speed and upload speed, so that like I don't have to go to like China and back to get part of my file from Canada. So like all my files stay within Canada basically. And we actually started like I looked at WNFS very early, and at that time we couldn't find much implementation, so we started like creating our own protocols. But then a month ago I rechecked WNFS and it was very advanced, and basically the way that we were going, it was the same way that WNFS went. And we said, okay, let's reuse what WNFS is building for our as a building block. So how we are using it is we use WNFS on the client side on mobile, and that's why we are creating a mobile runnable version on mobile. So we run WNFS on mobile. Basically WNFS creates the DAG of the file on mobile. We sync it with graph sync to the backend. And if the user owns multiple devices, to all his devices. And the pool and the replication factor is managed by the blockchain. So we send 2 calls, one to the user's device, one to the blockchain. The blockchain records the calls, let's say, another user then fetches the available files to be stored. And let's say they see that I want cat.jpg replicated twice on the network. So they say, okay, I want to store it once, and then another user, they store it another time on their device, and I have a full copy on my device, then replications on other devices. And everything on the back end is encrypted. That's why we are running WNFS directly on the client, because we don't want to send unencrypted devices outside of the client. So yeah, that was like a brief overview.
Yeah, that's great. It seems like that's exactly what WNFS was built for. It's exactly what, it's exactly what we're trying to do. Is very similar to that. Yeah, basically, you're putting it into new on new platforms, which I think is really cool. So you've created these Android bindings, or you've started writing Android bindings to RSWNFS. I've posted a link in the discussion notes, which is pretty cool and very exciting. I know, Chris, you've been looking into WNFS outside the browser as well, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, I could give a little background about how we hope to use it, although, to be frank, I mean, I think at this point it's still at a stage where it's speculative. But yeah, so our project core is a series of Rust crates, and we target both native targets and web with those crates. So our use case includes incorporating it for our native targets and incorporating it for our web targets. Although honestly, and I'd be interested to hear more on your thoughts, but we're not sure if the intended consumption on web is like as a JavaScript package or a Rust package that you can incorporate into a bunch of other Rust packages or what.
The intended usage of RSWNFS?
Yeah. So
okay.
Like when you think about how you're going to encourage usage on the web, are you planning to vend it as a JavaScript package with a WASM kernel, or are you intending to do, I don't know,
yeah, there's
like a Rust-oriented workflow that you can use to deploy to web?
Currently there is, well, we try to have a core of it, which is very much Rust, and well, it's designed to be usable very nicely from Rust, but we wrap that with a small layer that wraps that for JavaScript, but in a way that is maybe not easy to consume as someone coming from the JavaScript side. And then currently we're using that not that easy to consume layer inside of Web Native, our SDK at Fission, to provide a nicer interface for web app developers. So yeah, that's basically the three layers we have, and we'll keep having the in between JS bindings layer, but it's literally just what comes out of wasm pack or wasm bindgen with some small layer around the Rust core. So yeah.
Sorry, since I just recently took the mic, can I also ask, what is the intended scope of the community group around WNFS? Is it like designing WNFS sort of in a collaborative fashion, or is it more like a user group?
Good question. I guess it should be designed. It should be defined somewhere. I'll need to think about that. I don't have an answer for that right now. Mostly, I think this is great for helping people surface what they're building with WNFS, what use cases we'll have and we want to support, and where the state of everything is. Yeah, and so far that's what we're using it for. I guess we don't have multiple implementations that need to be synced or anything, and we can. Another thing that is maybe also in scope for the meeting is feature requests and thoughts on the spec and work on the spec. So yeah, those things mostly, I would say. Go ahead, Chris.
Can I just get sorry for dominating the mic, but can I maybe get like a 5-second status of like what is like implementation readiness of the current set of Rust code? Like if I wanted to go and try it out.
All right, yeah, that's a perfect segue into what we wanted to talk about today. Anyway, so WNFS is very much in progress. There exists a bunch of things. So, for example, some of the Fission apps, for example, the Fission Drive app, you can technically try out today with WNFS as the backing file system. However, that is only limited to the public file system right now. We're actively working on the private file system implementation in WNFS. And there's a couple of things that still need to be fixed, even in the public side, which in that case is just to be more coherent with the spec. There's some field names, small things. But then on the private side, there's a couple of construction sites. So we're right now working on private file sharding so that you can upload big files, big private files. And the metadata, and from the outside, you can't really see that it's multiple small files versus some big file. So that's what we're implementing right now. We're working on providing or future-proofing ourselves in terms of the data structure so that in the future, we'll be able to implement conflict resolution without having to do a migration, and it will just be another upgrade, some extra code in WNFS. That work is pretty much done. Then the private directory sharding is something that we may look into depending on what the use cases for people are. Right now, there's a somewhat hard limit on the size of directories that you can have, but that's in the thousands. So you can have a couple of thousand directory entries in a private file, and that's going to be fine. If you want to have something bigger, we may need to write some upgrades to WNFS and work a little bit on the spec on that end. And then finally, there's some internal stuff that we want to switch over from working with name filters, which are based on Bloom filters, instead to working with RSA accumulators, which would allow us to have unbounded depth in the private directory. So you can have more than 47 path elements if you want that. And also it has a little less tight security margin. So that's why we're working on that, which is one of the upcoming things we'll work on. No TBD there. It shouldn't be too hard to do, but yeah. In principle, there exists code to create private directories and read and write and work with private directories in WNFS today. And it works. It needs to be integrated. And the big thing for us at Fission, I think what it will be for everyone else too, is thinking around how often do you want to migrate your users to new versions of the file system. So right now we're batching quite some work in order to make sure that we will have all of the important pieces ready when we ship that to users, so we won't have to migrate them too often, because that's just much, much harder to do in the decentralized system than in any kind of centralized systems. Yeah, but then more longer term things we'll be working on is some linking to other file systems. That works still TBD, sharing private files, which uses these symlinks with other users and like providing all of these interfaces. And then more work is going to be diffing tools for public and private files, so that some server can someone can verify diffs between writes and see that all of the writes were authenticated, for example, or authorized. That's basically it. I don't have this. I have this in front of me on my desk. It's not somewhere on GitHub. I still need to figure out where to put it, but I will put it in. I'll also put the link to that into the meeting discussions. does that help?
Yeah, that's a really great outlook for the future. I don't know if it's interesting, but just to maybe color our own interest in this work, we have a need for sharing private content. That's sort of like the high level need. And I think there's a certain element of web native file system, which is that it sort of address the question of like hierarchical privacy within sort of a file system like structure, or at least it will. So that's interesting to us. Although for us, I often say it's like a simplified case, because for us hierarchy is sort of well defined. It's not free form like it is in a file system. And so there are paths we can take, I guess, where we lean into that simplicity a little bit and enable basic forms of end-to-end encryption in our data structure without something very sophisticated. I think in general, we prefer not to sort of reinvent a tiny piece of the wheel when there's a full-fledged wheel that we could just take advantage of. So it'd be awesome if we could start to incorporate some of the work you're doing, especially once you use Tread into private data and sort of maybe like multi-user sharing of access to private data.
That's actually that brings up one thing I want to mention very quickly. The RSA accumulator work we're doing will also enable having a more DAG-like private file system, so that you can actually put a file into multiple directories, and all of these directories link to the same thing. And the write permissions actually work out as you would expect. So anyone who has write permissions to any of the super directories can write to that file then. That said, we'll see how actually the code looks. So this is the thing, we'll always prioritize getting the data structure ready and getting the data structure into the right format so these things are enabled. But writing the code to actually do it is going to be a step 2. So yeah, just in terms of expectations of when that will ship or who contributes that, I don't know. All right. In general, I'll be up for having this be like a Q&A too. So if you have any questions off the top of your mind, just like Chris, please go ahead and ask them if you want to.
I have a random one. I haven't really looked closely at the WNFS APIs. I'm just curious, are UCANs incorporated into them on some level for any particular reason?
That's a good question, actually, and this has come up before. WNFS or WNFS and UCAN are very much separate, or so. WNFS does not have a dependency on UCANs. UCANs do not have a dependency on WNFS, but these two are obviously designed to work in tandem, and we're using them in tandem in @Fission. So WNFS can use any kind of authentication mechanism to authorize writes, but one of them can be UCAN. And the way that works is the accumulators at the end of the day are what allow this. Accumulators / just checking the public file diffs. And the accumulators, you would essentially put I numbers into UCANs, and an I number in a UCAN would mean this person has access to writing to a subset of the WNFS that has this I number in the accumulator. And then when you actually do a write, you need to either just have the UCAN around or have the UCAN plus some witnesses, which is the RSA accumulator case. But today, no UCANs are in WNFS. In the future, we think we may want to do some more tight integration of UCANs and WNFS, where UCANs are actually in the file system, and you'll be able to verify the state of a file system just from looking at it and reading all the UCANs within it. But that's not the case today, but it's on the roadmap essentially.
I know y'all are an open source project, and ostensibly designing and working in the open for everything. To what extent are you sort of interested in or soliciting community contributions to help with the work? I don't know to what extent that's like a part of Fission's general workflow, but
we try to work in the open for these contributions. It is, yeah, please do contribute. We are super open to that. And I think the best way is start looking at our stuff and then come into contact with us. Let's talk and let's figure something out. And that will help like coordination, and that'll help figuring out exactly what the change is going to be. And that's the way I think we should do contributions into WNFS. And yeah, we will have more better contribution guidelines in the future. We're working on that. But yeah, that's basically all I can say off the top of my head.
Looks like you got a question in the chat.
Yes. So Tuti asks, hi, a question, is there a plan for mutable multi-user file systems? So for example, a data structure that ties a DID to a list of UnixFS/WinFS roots and includes a predictable merge strategy for a way of marking conflicting files as such for user resolution. There is no plan for multi-user file systems. The design that WNFS goes for is mostly to have multiple, so everyone would have their own file system, but you would share access to parts of your file system with other people. And that can happen like everyone might have a file system and everyone would share with everyone else parts of their file system. That works. But also we realize that's maybe not super scalable, and maybe some other way of working with this would be better. We are working on having a more database-like system, which we call web-native database/dialogue, depending on who you talk to. So I would recommend looking out for that. I think there's a blog post coming up around that. Is that right? Does anyone remember? Zishan, James? I don't know.
There is actually a blog post on our blog. Let me grab the link real quick.
All right, cool. Yeah, then that will maybe a good introduction to that. And then, yeah, in the works. Yes, Chris?
On the topic of web native database and WinFS, do you see that as like, you know, sort of Rust web native file system may come into being, and then sort of at some future date, you're going to see web native database or dialogue land, and then like a future version of web native file system will be built on sort of the backbone of web native database? Or is it maybe like a completely different thing that's separate from web native file system that gets built on top of it, but has similar qualities to web native file system?
It's not a separate thing. So for example, what we're looking into right now is exactly how we serialize the database. So we've looked at query engines, and we've looked at how to send data around efficiently, get compute queries on the data. But now we're looking at serialization and encryption on those databases. And that will most likely just reuse private WinFS. So we will use the same accumulator and hand kind of structure, and users would or could just store parts of a database in their private file system right next to their files. So we definitely kind of think of there being like a very close connection. It's not a dependency per se. It's more like both dialogue or whatever the working title is going to be, and WNFS would use the hand and encryption methods, skip ratchet, and RSA accumulators, and they can actually sit next to each other in that so-called private forest. But yeah, we think about the integration there on that level. I don't think we will have a re-implementation of WNFS in dialogue. And dialogue is going to be mostly useful for accumulating information from multiple places and providing a queryable thing. And then out of there, and that's mostly, I think, me thinking about this very on the fly, but it could be that, for example, we would then go on and look at other file systems to actually accumulate all the data, or use the file system just for different purposes than the database. To be seen. Okay, so Tutti writes, thanks, we'll read about dialogue, and that means, though, that the shared folder use case of Nextcloud, Dropbox, Google Drive is out of scope for WNFS for the foreseeable future. No, that is exactly in scope. We will have, so one of the upcoming things is going to be shared private files. So that means that you can give someone else access to part of your file system that is both read and write access. So you can collaborate on some part of the file system. I guess, okay, I guess maybe I misunderstood your question a little bit. I guess that is kind of like a multi-user file system. And we do keep around the history, so it is possible to do conflict resolution on concurrent changes there. But yeah, that's speaking in the road mapping terms, that has not happened yet, but is going to happen. All right, cool. Yeah, no problem. All right, awesome. I guess if no one else has any more questions, we can give you all back quite a bit of time. I will put up somewhere the basically what I talked about in terms of roadmap for RS WNFS after the meeting, and I'll put in the meeting notes. So yeah, anyone have any last minute thoughts? All right, cool. Or
Very
Chris?
excited about this work. Thanks so much for hosting a call to talk about it.
No problem. Thank you for coming. All right. Say goodbye to the recording.